warm welcome to Martin Overton. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully you'll put up with me talking in English. My Swedish is non-existent. Danish, a little bit more, but not much. Anyway, I'm going to basically cover this during this session. The cyberstorm is coming. Are you ready? So I'm going to cover things like incident response, but also I'm going to cover some of the threatscape, so you'll understand what's coming along and what we're seeing. You might notice quite a lot of synergy between what I'm talking about and what the previous two presenters, certainly the last presenter and Jeff this morning was talking about. So there is quite a lot of crossover. Let's see if we get this to work. Right. Let's start off with a nice little cartoon. Basically, the criminals nowadays are actually starting to move to the digital world. It's no more the case of, like we see here, the bad guy goes into the bank with a gun and goes up to the teller and says, "Give me all your money." And of course, nowadays he will say, you can do this just as easily online. And this really has happened. We have seen, in hours, thieves took 45 million in an ATM scheme. So we know this is happening. And this is definitely what is happening. It's easier, it's less risk. You do it online. Easier to be anonymous. Makes it very, very much more difficult to actually track them down and actually prosecute them. Okay, so let's have a look at the problems that our incidents are causing and how do they happen first. This is some nice little stats from our X-Force Threat Advisory Service. 7 most attacked industries: health and social services, transportation, hospitality. Finance and insurance still very big. We see a lot of that. Manufacturing, real estate, mining, oil, gas. And what we're actually seeing is the average company experiences 62 security incidents per week. Now, that's not a full-blown attack quite often. That will be just things like somebody doing some port scanning, actually checking to see what ports are open, how they can possibly break into the system. Maybe looking for weak authentication methods on web servers, looking at is there a possibility of doing an SQL injection or a cross-site scripting attack, and I'll come on to that shortly. The type that we still see in most categories, we still see malware is the biggest chunk of what we see. And that is going to continue, especially with the so-called APTs, the advanced persistent threats, where they're not really just about malcode. A lot of people believe that that's the case. The reasons for compromise, the usual ones: double-clicking on anything, what I call double-click-itis. Click, click. PDF files. People forget that PDF files are dangerous. They can contain malicious code. And if you want to see an example of that, I've actually got a nice little video I can show you over at the booth, at the stand, which actually shows exactly how a PDF is used to backdoor a system and will allow you to actually, a remote attacker, to actually take over that system and to read all the key presses. So there's examples there. Disabling endpoint security. Oh, this pesky antivirus is in the way. It won't let me install my favorite tool. So I'll just turn it off. Yeah, typical thing. Failing to implement or update antivirus detection software. I would slightly disagree with the previous speaker who says that antivirus and IPS systems are signature-based. They're not just signature-based. A lot of them have behavioral analysis techniques now and heuristical analysis. They will detect stuff that it doesn't know as a signature, per se. So there are good reasons to still keep that technology. Using vulnerable legacy software and hardware, or failing to update or patch systems on a timely basis. The biggest way the most bad guys get in are through unpatched systems. If you patch your systems, you make the attack surface smaller, which means it's hard for a bad guy to get in. The persistent ones will try, and they will keep going until they get in if they really want to. Connecting endpoints to a network from an insecure access point, such as hotels, conferences, always a good one, any open Wi-Fi. It's easy for me to pop up a rogue access point and then see who will associate with me, who will actually try to give their credentials to me. Very, very useful. Connecting systems' virtual images to the internet before hardening. We still see customers who insist on putting brand new systems in production onto the internet without actually doing any form of security testing. Running unnecessary services, the usual stuff, and these are all the usual things. But at the end of the day, 80 to 90% of all security incidents can be easily avoided just by following good hygiene, security hygiene practices and making sure that you've actually got everything in place. Okay. So why has it changed? Mainly because we are seeing the movement of the perimeter. It's no longer a nice little just around your network. The perimeter is everywhere nowadays. It has to be, because we have things such as cloud and virtualization. We have your employees, your customers, your contractors, your outsourcers. Everybody who touches your network basically brings their risks with them, their possible compromising of your infrastructure. Mobility, well, we all use laptops, we all use mobile devices, and we're seeing that causing major problems. Social business. All of you, is anybody in the audience here who doesn't use LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter? Anybody at all? A few of you. You must use at least one of them, surely. Yeah. So we all give all this information away for free to people who to use against us. And this is what's happening with social engineering. Bring your own IT, or as I call it, normally known as BYOD, or bring your own destruction. You're bringing untrusted devices into your network because it saves lots of money. The corporate budget is a lot smaller if the staff bring their own devices into the network. Unfortunately, they're unmanaged devices. If you don't manage them, you don't look after them, it makes life very much more difficult. Then we look at everything else. The Internet of Things has already been mentioned. We've got fridges that send spam now. We have toilets that are Bluetooth enabled and can be hacked via Bluetooth. We have smart TVs that can actually be hacked. Has anybody actually got an LG TV here? LG smart TV? Well, if you have, by the way, the webcam in there can be monitored remotely anytime without you knowing about it. So just be aware of that. We have cars that have basically computers built into them now. You can hack a car via Bluetooth, etc., etc. It's just getting more and more ridiculous nowadays. Okay. What's actually happening is, though, we're seeing that the attackers have more resources than the companies that they're attacking. They have more money. They make more money out of this by actually hacking people. So what we actually see is the old days, or we still see the curiosity revenge stuff, but most of it is at the top end of this now. We are very much looking at the second decade of the commercial internet with national security, nation-state actors, and espionage, political activism, and monetary game. It's about professional criminals and nation-states making money or stealing data to order. Another way of looking at the same data, we still have the script kiddies, the worm and virus writers, 49%, but they're really just the low end, they're just a bit background noise. What we're really interested in is these people at the top here, the national, the government, terrorist cells, crime cartels, as well as the malicious insiders. Hacktivists still have impact, but they don't tend to cause quite so much of trouble as they used to. We still see lots of DDoSes coming from hacktivists, though. The bad guys are also learning from that, and I'll cover that shortly. Here's some example of first security incidents. Hopefully that should be at one line, but there we go. In the first half of 2013, as this is an example from data from the X-Force Threat Advisory service that we offer. As you can see, we have all the common attack types. SQL injection, most common type we see against web services, closely followed by cross-site scripting, XSS. Spear phishing, targeted phishing attacks. You that give away your data on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, any other online service, you make it easier for a social engineer to attack you and to attack your company. DDoS, I'm going to come on to that shortly. We're seeing a massive increase in DDoS, and I've just been helping a customer just this week with a new DDoS attack, which was actually an NTP reflection attack, new type of attack which we've not seen much of before, and it completely overwhelmed their data pipe. It didn't even touch their web servers because the data never even got to the web servers. It just completely flawed their data pipe. Physical access, we still see malware, we still see watering hole, which I'll come on to next, I think. And then there's the unknowns where the customer has not given away the information of exactly how they were attacked. Let's move into SQL injection, still the most common. Mainly we see it through any systems that are actually using old CMS or content management system installations, where plugins are the favorite way that the bad guys, as a hacker, my hacker hat on, the white one, not the black hat that's there, because I'm an ethical hacker, I will look at, if I find a system that's using a content management system, the first thing I'll look is what plugins are installed. Who wrote those plugins? Do they know about security? If not, are they patched? Can I use them to get into the system? And frequently I can. So forum software are quite often third-party scripts. We see lots and lots of online systems being hacked that way. DDoS, right. What we're actually seeing with DDoS is the bandwidth is going up. We're quite often seeing traffic in excess of 300 gigabits per second now. Now, unless you've got a very, very big data pipe, you're not going to be able to handle that. We're seeing banks being held to ransom. We're seeing governments being held to ransom. We're seeing DNS providers being attacked. But it's not just the usual stuff. It's not just SYN floods, UDP, TCP. What we're seeing now is more DNS reflection and NTP reflection attacks, which are far more devastating and harder to defend against. And you see most of these are banks, non-profit, online services, DNS providers, etc. So we're seeing lots and lots of this. And what we're seeing here is that the bad guys are using DDoS attacks as a smokescreen, a diversion, while they go after what they're really after. While you're focused over there at your DDoS, what is being DDoSed, they'll go and attack systems that they really are interested in your infrastructure. And you will not even know they're there because you're focused somewhere else. Watering hole, quite often known as a drive-by download or drive-by attack. These are targeting savvy users who will go to known sites, trusted sites. It's not the sites themselves that are necessarily infected or compromised. It may well be the ad servers that are actually serving that site from a third party that have been compromised. So we've seen examples of what we call malvertising, poisoning the ad servers, which poisons legitimate and secure web servers. So even trusted servers. Anybody actually here use Spotify? Anybody use the free version of Spotify rather than pay for it? Okay. Those of you that did, several years ago, they actually got hit by a malvertising attack, where if you had the free version of Spotify installed, which serves up ads as part of your listening pleasure, the mere act of serving up that ad to you, even if you didn't click on it, would be enough to infect your computer, just because the back-end ad servers were actually infected. So infected your system, that your system then belonged to the bad guys. So what's actually happening, we're seeing lots and lots of sophistication now. So we're actually seeing they're very much organized and well-funded, which I've already mentioned. They're using coordinate attacks to distract and to strike precisely. So they're actually using DDoS as a distraction method while they go and attack what they're really after, be it a spear phishing attack or a direct attack against a particular data source. They leverage tried and true techniques like SQL injection and cross-site scripting. They use watering holes. We know they do that. They target key points of interest via spear phishing. So they go after key individuals because you're giving all that information away on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and everywhere else that you leave all your data. It's very, very easy. Profile organizations using public data and social media, which I mentioned, and the sophistication is extremely high now. We are not talking about 14-year-old spotty teenage boys who have not yet found girls. We are now talking about professional level code written by professional programmers for professional criminals, or nation states as the case may be. Attackers always look for the least path of resistance, so the low-hanging fruit as we call it. That's what they can, if it's easy to attack, they'll go and attack it. If it's more difficult and they really want to get in, they will keep going until they get in. Social media, I think the previous presenter actually mentioned, in April of 2013, 60 characters cost the US stock market $200 billion because their Twitter account got hacked. And I think that was what he was actually explaining previously. So that's what we're seeing, that social media is actually can be very costly to companies. Mobile devices, I'm sure, how many of you actually all got Android phones? Okay. How many of you have got iOS or Apple phones? Okay. None of you are safe, but those of you who've got Android phones, if you haven't got Android 4.2 or later, then your phones are basically very easy for a bad guy to actually own and to take over. So if you have Android 4.2 or later, then it's fine. The trouble is, of course, that most mobile phone manufacturers will not update their firmware very often, which is a bit of a pain. But what we're seeing is the malware authors and the bad guys are now starting to go after Android big time. And we're going to start seeing some massive botnets before long on Android. Okay. What else? This is what's happening in the industry when people have been hacked. So what we're actually seeing, the initial attack to initial compromise is seconds, minutes, or hours. But the actual detection is frequently days, weeks, or months. Some cases, never. Some cases, customers will have no idea they've even been attacked. Attacks are inevitable, basically. Whatever you do, you are constantly under attack. If you have anything of any value, even to your competitors, you are constantly under attack. The thing is, you don't always have to be in the news about it. You can actually deal with it, but you can't stop an attack if you can't see it. You've got to actually have actionable data, as Jeff was saying right at the beginning. Okay, let's move over to emergency response and customer real stories. These are real ones. So the first thing we want to do is set some sort of benchmarks. So these are the assumptions that we make generally for most companies. Assumption 1, I'm under attack right now. Well, if you're anybody on the internet and you have an internet-facing systems, you are probably under attack 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Assumption 2, attackers are already in. It's quite possible. They may even be working for you. You may have no idea that you have bad guys inside your own network. Assumption 3, that no endpoint device is secure. Everybody keeps moving towards the let's extend our perimeter to include all these other partners, third parties, vendors, etc. You can't keep doing that. You're going to have to move back to the old standard of where is my crown jewels? Where do I need to really protect? What do I need to protect? And you protect that and you treat everything else as an untrusted device. So what we're finding with most organizations, they generally don't have any cross-company policy and process for incident response. They have no incident response plan at all. They need to have one. So what happens is every time they have an incident, they run around like headless chickens. They have no actionable insight and information upon to which they have no useful data to actually say, this type of attack is about to come, or we're seeing an uptick in this particular type of attack. We need to take some action now. Incident management and forensic analysis tooling for remote system capture analysis. Most companies don't have that. They don't even have the skills in-house to do that. It's extremely expensive to have people sitting around waiting for the next attack in your own company. And this really is the most important thing. Information is the new worldwide currency. Every piece of data is valuable to someone, somewhere, somehow. The previous presenter actually showed CryptoLocker. CryptoLocker is a particularly nasty piece of malware that holds files to ransom, but it's not the first time we've seen this. We saw this back in the dawn of computing in the early 1990s. So it's something that we keep seeing. We see old techniques being dusted off and reused. So you can learn a lot from looking back at history, especially on the malcode and hacking attack. So here's some examples of the types of customers we deal with. Military contractors, security companies, gas companies, banks, lots of banks, police forces. Even police forces get hacked, get malware infections. Insurers, oil companies, etc. I'm going to just kind of touch on a couple of these. This is actually an international bank. Now, this is rather unusual because the bank contacted us saying that they'd actually believed that their systems had been hacked by social engineering. So I mentioned about you giving all your data away. Here we have a real example of a real-life attack where a customer has been attacked by information that their staff has given away. Now, what's actually happened is, in this case, the customer's own bank staff were phoned up and they were told that the attacker was actually from their local support department. They knew all about their internal systems, they knew all about the staff, they knew all about the local weather, and they managed to convince them to install a remote access tool. And you say, well, that's okay, why didn't it detect it from their antivirus? Well, it wasn't a brand new piece of malcode. They got the customer's own staff to install a commercial remote access tool. Citrix, go to my PC. That's not going to be detected by any antivirus. And what's harder is once we actually identified that was how they got in, we could only go back as far as their proxy servers in Citrix because, of course, they manage all that side. So we could not find the original attacker. So we actually identified a number of issues for them. International Shore, I'm not going to cover this. This is more for reference. But again, this is a customer who thought they'd been hacked. However, it turned out that it was one of their own staff that had actually downloaded a stress testing tool, which brought down part of their key infrastructure when ran. An international security company. This is an antivirus company that got hacked. Okay? So antivirus companies get hacked just like everybody else does. But not only did they get hacked via an unpatched server, the bad guys were also trying to drop malware onto an antivirus company's servers, which is not a good idea. And we got called in to actually help them out. We identified not only how the bad guys got in, but who the bad guys were down to their IP address, and the FBI arrested them and charged them. This is probably the most James Bond one I've got, which is actually an international defense contractor. You heard from Jeff this morning, actually mentioning that you could actually be, that contractors have been hacked. Well, this is an example, brand new piece of malcode. Nobody had ever seen it before. The first they knew was when the FBI phoned them up and said, by the way, guys, you've been hacked. You really need some help now. They called IBM. We went in. Not only did we find the malware within about an hour of turning up on site, but we actually wrote a customized, a bespoke detection script, cleanup script, which reported all the stuff back to management. So what do we see? We've seen the majority of cases have been as a result of targeted attack or some type of DDoS, spear phishing, brute force entry, etc. In all these cases, the majority of the time, the client had been infected or experienced abnormal activity for quite a while before they actually realized they ought to do something about it. And quite often what we actually get is when we go on site, the customer tries to fix things themselves, which of course, if in a forensics case, it's the last thing you want the customer to do because it actually tramples over all the evidence that we need to try and find the bad guys. Those that had an incident response program in place, because not all customers do have an incident response plan, and it's really important to have one in place. Basically, those that didn't actually have had not tested it in the last 2 years, so it's not up to date, threats are constantly changing. Most of the clients, upon discovering the incident, panicked and acted as if their hair was on fire, so they were what we call headless chicken mode, running around not knowing what to do, and usually doing the wrong things in the process. Everybody actually underestimated how long and how complex it is to do forensics properly. Okay. Most of them didn't have any enterprise actionable intelligence. They had no real useful data to actually base it all on. Right, summary on the last slide now. The threatscape's getting more complex. It's getting very hard to actually understand all the attacks that are coming on. We know that they're getting more complicated, and as somebody said previously, you don't see lots of pop-ups anymore on your system. It's all behind the scenes. However, all of these things have got to communicate out, either to send data back to the bad guys or to receive new instructions. That is where you will normally detect them, through their command and control systems. Threats are getting smarter and more stealthy, so they're not obvious. This is probably the most important one. Think of an APT, an Advanced Persistent Threat Attack, as a persistent penetration test. However, without your approval or knowledge, but it uses hacking techniques which are old. It uses social engineering, and it uses malware. Think of it as human-guided malware, if you prefer. You need to be aware, you need to be proactive, you need to be prepared. The idea is you want to try and minimize your attack surface to make it as hard as possible for a bad guy to go after you. And when, obviously, you do get hacked, hopefully you'll come and talk to us, and that's as much as I get to a sales pitch. Okay, any questions?
Okay, thank you, Martin. There's a question.
Sure.
If you protect everything as good as you can, but then you go home and work,
Yep.
and you have your kids downloading all kind of crap,
Yep.
how secure is your data? Let's say you have your webmail, you don't need a VPN to access it.
This is exactly the point with bring your own device or bring your own destruction. That's exactly why I call it bring your own destruction. If it's an unmanaged device and you allow anybody to have access to it, there's no division between a work device and a home device. That is where the danger is. Unless you have something that's completely controlling that device and managing to make sure that it's fully patched, it's meeting all the security standards for your company, it's got all the latest antivirus updated and possibly personal IPS and firewall, etc., then you have a real risk. This is exactly why I'm not a great believer in BYOD, because I think it's really an accident waiting to happen. We're hearing of so many large companies who are running headlong down this way. We can save pots of money by letting staff use their own devices, but they don't secure them, and then they wonder why they get hacked. It's exactly the issue.
Are you at risk also if you use the same Wi-Fi at home? They're not using your actual computer, but...
You should be less of a risk if you've got the actual proper division between a work device and a home device. Yes, there is some risk. Personally, I have 2 DSL lines. One is only used for home, and the other one is only used for work. So that makes life. But then again, I do hacking as well.
Thank you.
Some more questions? Just a comment. When I talk to CSOs in companies, they seem as though they have a lot of security policy, and they're doing risk analysis and
Yep.
whatsoever. But that's not your picture of the actual situation.
No, this is very much that. To a certain extent, most companies do some form of analysis of their data, but most of them have no ideas. Certainly with the example of the military contractor, they had no idea they were losing terabytes of data per day across their network because it was going out over SSL. So it was going out encrypted across their normal port 443 SSL traffic, and they were doing no bandwidth monitoring whatsoever. So unless you bandwidth monitor, you would not see that data going out. So they had no idea. But this is quite often what we're seeing is, yes, a lot of customers still don't monitor everything properly. They're also very much looking at the whole perimeter rather than looking at crown jewels.
Okay. And I think a lot of people here in the are quite surprised that SQL injections are still working.
Indeed, they are. And they're, in fact, I've got a nice little video that I can show you if anybody wants to come over to the stand, which actually shows you just how easy it is for a bad guy to break in once they know what they're doing, with nothing more than a web browser and just a bit of knowledge. It's quite scary just how quick we can get in, bypass authentication, and not only that, but we can also take over the whole web server and dump all the tables out, modify tables, etc. We have great fun with it. So if you want any more information, feel free to come and talk to me on the stand. I'll be here around all the rest of the day.
Okay, thank you, Martin.
Thank you.